Hello, this is Brian Rowe with Mythic MTG Tech, and I'm here with Greg Mitchell going over a Bomberman list that he's been working on for a while.
Hey guys, I'm Greg Mitchell.
So tell us about this deck, your experience at Eternal Weekend, and then how the deck really works.
Yeah, for sure. So Bomberman is, in my mind, the inheritor of the combo control archetype in Vintage. For a long time, this is obviously a Vintage deck, you've got power. And for a long time, combo control is considered to be the best, so those old lists look like Tinker-based Grixis control decks with Yawgmoth with Will as a finisher. The reason why they're so powerful is because you can delay the game and control the game just long enough to win all at once. And so that's a really powerful strategic option to have. You don't have to take total control of the game. You only have to do something broken on one turn. You have to find your window. And so this does a pretty similar thing to the old Tinker list, but I'm not playing any of the mainstay of the old combo control decks. No Yawgwill, no Tinker, no Vault Key even. Like there's none of the really compact, efficient 2-card combos. Instead, there's a rather inefficient 3-card combo, which is Ariok Salvagers with its 2-mana activation, targeting Black Lotus. And then once you have those two, you can get infinite mana, and there's a couple of different ways to win from there. The easiest one to explain is have Tasigur in play, activate Tasigur until your entire deck is in your graveyard and all the lands are in your graveyard, all the non-land cards are in your hand. At that point, you can Ancestral Recall them until they draw their deck. So that's the quickest to explain. The other option is you have Monastery Mentor. So since you're returning Black Lotus and actually casting it each time as part of the combo iteration, that'll give you infinite mentors and infinitely huge mentors. And so if you can find a Time Walk, you can kill them then. If you find a Swords to Plowshares, you can gain infinite life. And even if you just have to pass the turn, having infinite tokens is winning most people, beating most people. Of course, there's Nihil Spellbomb to draw into the rest of your deck. You can draw your deck with this. That's another option, or another way to get these.
Okay. So let's go through the deck and talk about why different cards are in there. Just starting with the upper left there. What have you got for card selection in this deck?
Cool, yeah. So the list that I based it off of was Brian Ritter's from the NYSE. So that was a cool tournament. They had 100 people, and he had this 7th place Bomberman list. It had a bunch of, I think, less efficient cards like Thirst for Knowledge, Thought Scour. It didn't have any dig through times. My focus when building this deck is to ensure that I can get to 3 mana. 3 mana is very fundamental because it allows you to get to Trinket Mage, which then can give you enough mana to go forwards, and also Monastery Mentor. So that's why Preordains are in there over Thirst for Knowledge, and Thought Scour I just don't think is a very efficient card. We have Treasure Cruise, which is super, super good. Like, that should go without saying. It's an Ancestral Recall, it's restricted, banned in Legacy for a very good reason. And there's only 2 dig through times. That's because I'm also playing 2 Taskers. You can't have too many Delve spells in the deck. But the dig through times are very, very solid as well.
So you're running a total of 5 Delve spells?
That's right, a total of 5.
Okay.
So we've got, what is this, 8 sort of card selection, card advantage tools. Mm-hmm. Then we've got 12 disruption spells. Mm-hmm. The build I played at Eternal Weekend was, it didn't have red in it at all. And I found that I had a huge issue with onboard Planeswalkers. Despite being a creature deck and theoretically being able to attack them, if I was just behind on board, a Resolve Planeswalker meant I could never catch back up. So Pyroblast, so the red splash is really good there. I'm torn if I should play Lightning Bolt or Pyroblast. I think they both have their merits.
So why are you going with Pyroblast now, and why do you think you would do Lightning Bolt at some point in the future?
The biggest reason for Pyroblast is Dack Fane. I want to be able to beat a deck that +1s. Dack Fane, once he activates a couple of times, almost always wins the game. Just like a Jace activation a couple of times, almost always wins the game. It also can counter big spells like Ancestral Recall or Dig Through Time maybe. Mm-hmm. But I think that's less. The biggest consideration for me is Dack. And then Sword Splashers over Bolt is because it's more uncolor, it's more versatile. Sure, it doesn't kill Planeswalkers, but it does kill Cold Oath Forge Master, Gigantic Mentors, Tasigur, that sort of thing.
So your control suite, Force of Will at 4 makes a lot of sense. Talk about why you're at 4 for Mental Misstep.
So I've seen a lot of lists running 3. I've played 3 for a while in my Delver list, but it just was very apparent to me over playing a lot of Vintage that 4 is 100% the correct number for every blue deck that relies on casting 1-drops, which is pretty much all of them except like the Answer. That's a blue-red Chalice of the Void deck. Super interesting deck that might be fun to feature at some point. So 4 missteps, like think about the most important spells you want to counter. Recall is very difficult to come back from. Pyroblast is a pretty much unconditional answer to your Planeswalkers and your card advantage. And Misstep is also pretty crucial on just hitting other missteps. So it's almost always something I want to have in my hand, which is why I think it's a 4 of.
Okay. So this next group that you've got, Time Walk along with your utility artifacts. What's going on there?
Yeah, so it's difficult. I'm not sure where Time Walk falls under. Obviously, it's a card that you want to play. A lot of times it's just Explore. Like I said before, it's sort of fundamental mana cost is 3. Once you can get to 3, you can probably find a way to win the game, assuming your opponent gives you the chance. So being able to get to 3 a turn earlier with Time Walk can actually be a pretty big game. And of course, it's insane with Mentor, great with Planeswalkers. So top is one of the things I get most often with Trinket Mage. It's a way to, if you think you're going to the late game, it's pretty tough to beat an active top. Engineered Explosives is amazingly versatile. You can get it back with Auriok Salvagers even if you don't have Black Lotus. It clears out all the tokens, clears thorns, so sphere effects. So there's a super interesting interaction with the sphere effects out of shops. You can declare an X of less than what you intend to pay once you include all the taxing effects, and then Sunburst only checks the mana actually spent on it. So using that, you can kind of circumvent the thorn and sphere tax effects and still be able to blow them up. And then Spellbomb is a way to win with Auriok Salvagers. It's a main deck Grave Hate. I think there's a really reasonable argument for Pyrite Spellbomb. I'm not sure which is better. I think a third or fourth piece of removal in 75 is reasonable. I have a Swords in the sideboard right now, but if I put a Pyrite Spellbomb main deck, I probably can cut the Swords in the sideboard.
Okay. Next we've got the ramp artifacts. Has Mana Crypt come back to bite you at all, or is it essential to the deck?
Yeah, so this is a Mana Crypt deck without a way to get rid of it. There's no Tinker. There's no Hercules Recall. It's been close. I've definitely had Mana Crypt races before. It's one of those cards that is actually kind of unpleasant about Vintage. One of my opponents lost a game where he lethal on board because he lost 6 out of 8 Mana Crypt flips while I was doing nothing. So it was tense, like it was a nail biter, but it wasn't really decided by either of our play skills. That being said, it's way too powerful to not play in this sort of deck. I have a lot of colorless costs, the Trinket Mage, the Auriok Salvagers, Mentor, what have you. I think it's important to note that I'm not playing Vault or Lion's Eye Diamond, Lotus Petal. Those things are pretty much only good when you're comboing out. Otherwise, they're pretty much just -1 card. This deck plays much more like a control deck. You don't want that effect.
So let's talk about the land base a little bit here. I don't see things like a library, and I do see a bunch of Cavern of Souls. What's going on there?
Yeah, so the original list that I talked about, Brian Ritter's list, he had a library. I did some playing with the list, and you really just can't afford so many colorless sources. Despite having a lot of colorless symbols in the deck, it is fairly color intensive. And especially with Cavern of Souls not being able to cast your blue cantrips or blue draw spells, you can definitely find yourself in issues where you just can't cast your spells. And I'm also pretty down on library in general. It's definitely good in Gush decks where you can pick up lands, refill your hand pretty easily. But against a deck like Shops or Delver, you can't actually take the time off. Like, you cannot afford to spend a turn and spend a turn tapping the library and just playing one spell a turn.
Okay. Academy makes sense because of all the lands that or all the artifacts that you've got in there.
Yeah, I think it's close to being cut, despite how powerful it is. Just because it's a little inconsistent. But again, it's kind of too powerful to cut.
How important are the basic lands that are in there? You've got an island and you've got a plains.
Oh, very important. So this deck's mana base was surprisingly good when I played it at Eternal Weekend. I didn't have so I was playing black instead of red. So there were 2 Cs here, and this was another Tundra. The basics allow you to cast a lot of spells between the 2 basics and a mox. You can cast most of your important spells, and it's pretty easy to be able to never fetch a duel until you have to play something big like Auriok Salvagers. So the mana is pretty important.
Let's go over the creatures here. What do the creatures got in common? How did that particular suite make it in here?
Sure. So again, going back to the list I started from, I cut a Tasigur and a Snapcaster Mage for 2 mentors. There were a ton of mentors at Eternal Weekend, and I think it should be pretty obvious at this point that Mentor is one of the best creatures in Vintage. Like, it combos off with all the moxes that I have. Trinket Mage finds another spell to cast with Mentor. It's another win condition with the Auriok Salvagers combo. So he's a good inclusion. Tasigur, being a 4/5 for very little, is huge in this format where Lightning Bolt is such a card, such a big card. I actually had games where I was activating Tasigur and drawing cards. So it doesn't come up often, but it does sometimes allow you to get some card advantage there. Trinket Mage is one of the best cards in the deck, which seems crazy. It's just a Borderland Ranger, right? But it's actually a Borderland Ranger when you need it. It finds removal, it finds win conditions, it finds card selection. Vintage is a format dominated by small creatures, except for shops. But Trinket Mage can actually block pretty well. He can block Pyromancer tokens. He can block monks if they don't have spells. I got to double block with a Trinket Mage and a Devout Witness when my opponent attacked in with his Monastery Mentor and a couple of tokens. I think he just wasn't expecting the double block, but it is definitely a line of play. And then Auriok Salvagers, of course, is the combo card, but I'm going to go back again to this toughness. 4 is just a lot. I was able to win a game against Grixis Delver in Eternal Weekend where I played 2 4s for 4 and started beating down, and he just couldn't trade profitably.
And the Planeswalker suite that you've got in here, 1 Jace, 2 Dax. Why that particular choice?
Yeah, so I didn't have a Jace at Eternal Weekend, and of course didn't have Dax. But I found, like I said, that I was losing to Planeswalkers quite often. So it raises the obvious question: if I keep on losing to Planeswalkers, why am I not playing them? Jace should go without saying, one of the best Planeswalkers. And Dak, I think, is even better than Jace. He steals artifacts, so he's great against shops. The card selection here, the +1, is pretty similar to a Brainstorm plus Dark Ritual. Like, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's not that far off.
So you say it's great against shops. Playing against decks without artifacts, like a Delver deck, do you leave him in or do you pull him out?
For sure, I always leave in deck because the card selection is so important. Getting cards in graveyard for Delve is so important. The Delve spells are the most important cards in the matchup between Tasigur, Dig Through Time, and Treasure Cruise. So being able to get closer to find your Delve spells and get closer to casting them is well worth it.
Yeah, it also seems like there's a good amount of land in the deck and everything's low casting cost, so if you can turn that land into real spells late game, that's amazing.
Yeah, very true. There's 25 mana sources, and I definitely flood it out sometimes.
Well, let's bring the sideboard out here and talk about the sideboard.
Cool. Okay, so this is the sideboard. I think there's sort of a couple of packages to note first. So let's start with the easiest sideboard package. You always have to have a plan for dredge in Vintage. If you don't have about 6 or 7 ways to beat dredge plus a reasonable plan against them, you're going to lose. The deck is very resilient. I'm actually a bit on the low side, so I've got 1 Spellbomb main deck, I've got 5 sideboard cards. It's a little borderline, but I have 3 Trinket Mages to help find either of these 2 or the Spellbomb main. And depending on how their list is configured, they might not be able to beat several containment priests post-board. A lot of them have adopted Barbarian Ring as their anti-creature tech, but if they see that you're an artifact-heavy deck, it's possible they don't bring it in. Instead, they just bring in Chewers and Claims and a bunch of those sort of cards. So being able to present different sorts of answers is pretty good. So that's the Dredge package, these plus Swords. Now against Oath, it's pretty similar. It's these cards. You want to be able to clear an Oath off the table if it resolves. Notably, it's not Engineered Plague. I found that since Oath is also a blue deck, a lot of the anti-blue cards are just good against them to begin with, and I don't think there's room. And since I'm a creature deck, I'm going to be playing a creature at some point. So the next package is against Shops. So we have four Chewers, the Wear Terror, an extra EE, Sword Splashers, and Mountain. So I mentioned the interesting interaction with Spheres earlier. EE is super good against them. Sword Splashers clears out all their gigantic fatties. Ingot Chewer is kind of a crazy card, but it's surprisingly this card alone makes red the best color to beat Shops with, because it doesn't get hit by Chalice for one. It doesn't get taxed by Thorn of Amethyst, and late game it's a legitimate threat that you can start casting.
So you can definitely cast it as a 3/3, kill an artifact, and then beat them down with it.
Exactly. In the build at Eternal Weekend, I had a couple of Hurkyl's Recalls, with the idea being that I could just combo off, bounce a bunch of Sphere Effects, combo off. It's possible that it's a mistake to not have any total board wipe except for Engineered Explosives. I haven't played enough games with this new build to know for sure. So Hurkyl's Recall, definitely a card to keep on your radar. Now against Delver, the package is something like this, these 4 cards. Usually want some more removal. When I say Delver, I mean Monastery Mentor, any sort of gush creature deck, I would say.
So Young Pyros.
Grixis Control, any of those. Yep. So the reason for that is, so E-Plague, if you're playing against Blue-Red Delver, or Grixis Delver, or Grixis Control, the one with Snapcasters and Containment, or Cabal Therapies, Engineered Plague actually hardlocks their deck on a stable board. They have literally 0 creatures that they can play that don't die to it. So at that point, it's extremely difficult to lose the game. Against Mentors, usually named Monk, so that means that their Monastery Mentor itself is a 1/1 with Prowess, but it doesn't make any Monk tokens. There's some dyssynergy with the Mentors in your own list, but I think generally having this in play against a deck that relies on Mentor as its win condition puts you in a favorable position, because you have other better ways to win, like Tassiger and RX Salvagers comboing off.
Any other major matchups that you ran into, or?
So I played against Brian Kelly at Eternal Weekend. Obviously had no idea what he was doing. He's a madman, like a mad genius of Vintage. He's pretty cool. But I found that I didn't have another card that wiped the graveyard, so that's why I added the Tormod's Crypt. I think if I hadn't played him, this would have just been another Grafdigger's Cage, since it's a more powerful and versatile effect. Maybe there's going to be more Bomberman now that we have this deck tech that Bomberman is a kind of Bomberman combo one. So having things that actually wipe the graveyard, I think, is pretty important.
So what is your best matchup and what is your worst matchup?
I think it is extremely difficult to lose against any Mentor deck. The Mentor decks are a little slower. They have more dead draws going late. And strategically, you outmatch them in terms of being able to win instantly. You have more powerful tools. And you also have a combo finish, which is something they can't... They have difficulty dealing both with your Mentors and Taskers and with your RX Salvager combo. The Delver decks are actually harder because Pyromancer comes down earlier, and just the way they're constructed, it's so much easier for them to chain spells together. They can just gush into Preordain, into Gitaxian Probe if they play them, deck Fade in, drawing more cards. when they combo off, they make way more tokens, and it's way harder to catch back up. But again, Engineered Plague hardlocks them. So I think it's generally a favorable matchup. Shops is even to favorable. You play a lot of mana sources, and it's a fairly low curve. There's good hate. Ingot Chewer is amazing.
It looks like it gets very good after board.
It does get very good after board, but it's definitely a difficult game one. I think Dredge is good to favorable. Close to good. It really depends on the list. There's been a lot of interesting tech out of Dredge decks. There's been the Dark Depths combos, the Divining Witch combo, and just Barbarian Ring. It's something I mentioned before as a thing that triggers landfall, kills the creatures that are pretty prevalent in Vintage now. The Dredge decks are getting better, and against a good pilot, I could definitely see losing the match because game one is very, very difficult to win.
Okay. And any other closing thoughts on the deck, or any recommendations for anybody who wants to give it a try?
I think it's an awesome deck. I actually do think it's the best deck in Vintage. My only recommendation for someone giving it a try is try to play it more as a creature control deck. So if you've ever played Fairies in Standard, or maybe Blue, White, Red Flash in Standard, back in RTR, it plays a lot like that. It does have a combo finish, and the big skill gap in learning this deck is going to be knowing when you can beat down and knowing when you should just go all in and try to assemble your combo as quickly as possible.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Hey, thank you to everybody who's over there on Patreon supporting the channel. This is the type of cool, longer content I would like to do a lot more of, and it's your fault that I am able to. Thank you. We've got some cool content coming out this week, including a top 5 Legacy deck list and a hot and not list based on MTG stock stuff. Those should both be out by the end of the weekend, maybe even a little bit sooner.